The galaxy had seen many wars, but nothing like this. The conflict started on the far edge of known space, where a small alien species called the Ve'ari lived. They were not warriors. They were builders, thinkers, and dreamers. Their world was rich in forests, rivers, and crystal skies. The Ve'ari loved peace, but peace was not something the galaxy respected. A brutal empire known as the Drexer came without warning. Their warships darkened the skies of the Ve'ari homeworld. They burned cities, captured villages, and dragged families away. The Drexer called it expansion. The Ve'ari called it destruction. The galaxy called it nothing. None of the great powers moved a finger to help. The Council of Worlds, the so-called guardians of peace, watched from their shining towers. They debated in endless chambers. Some said helping the Ve'ari would risk war with the Drexer. Others said the Ve'ari were too weak to matter. Their voices filled the air with excuses, but their silence was what the Ve'ari remembered most. Every race turned away. Every fleet stayed docked. The Ve'ari begged, but the galaxy ignored them. For the first time in their long history, they felt truly alone. But not all eyes looked away. Somewhere far from the Ve'ari homeworld, a small human ship picked up their distress call. Humans were not powerful compared to the great empires. They were still considered new to the galactic stage. Many thought of them as reckless, unpredictable, too emotional to be trusted. But sometimes it is the reckless who act when others are frozen in fear. The crew of that human ship listened to the cries of the Ve'ari. They heard the sound of children screaming as Drexer fire rained down. They heard the broken voices of parents begging for help. And something inside the humans refused to ignore it. They made a choice that the galaxy would never forget. When the ship landed on the ruined surface of the Ve'ari world, smoke still rose from burning cities. The air was heavy with ash and sorrow. The humans were simple armor, nothing close to the Drexer's war machines. Yet when they walked through the rubble, the Ve'ari saw something in them they had not seen in anyone else. Courage. The first human to step forward was a soldier with dirt on his face and scars on his hands. He carried no banner of empire, no symbol of power. He simply knelt beside a wounded Ve'ari child and whispered soft words the alien could not understand, but the tone carried across all languages. It was the tone of someone who cared. The Ve'ari elders came out from hiding. They trembled, not trusting what they saw. Why would humans risk their lives for strangers? Why would anyone, when the galaxy had already turned its back? One of the elders asked in a broken voice, "Why are you here? Do you not fear the Drexer?" The human soldier looked at him and answered in the plain way humans often spoke, "Because someone has to be." Those words spread through the survivors like fire through dry wood. For the first time since the invasion began, the Ve'ari felt hope. Small, fragile, but alive. But hope is not enough to fight empires. Soon, Drexer warships returned to finish what they had started. The humans could have left. They could have saved themselves and gone back to their own world, but they stayed. They carried the wounded, rebuilt shelters, and shared food from their supplies. And when the Drexer soldiers marched into the ruins again, the humans stood in their way. The galaxy had called humans reckless. The Drexer laughed at them, but the Ve'ari watched closely. They saw how humans moved, how they fought. The Drexer were machines of war, precise and cold. The humans were fire, unpredictable, stubborn, and fierce. Every strike from the Drexer was met with human defiance. Every time they were pushed down, they rose again. The Ve'ari could hardly believe what they saw. These fragile creatures from a distant world stood against monsters the entire galaxy feared. And in that moment, the Ve'ari understood something. The humans were not the strongest, nor the most advanced. But they were different. They had something no other species had shown. In this war, the will to stand for others when no one else dared to. The war had only begun, but already the story was changing. The galaxy had ignored the cries of the weak, but humanity had heard them. And that single act, small as it seemed, would one day change everything. The Drexer did not take long to notice the humans. To them, a single ship and a handful of soldiers were nothing but an annoyance. Their commanders laughed when they saw reports of humans helping the Vayari survivors. They believed it was only a matter of time before the humans were crushed like insects under steel boots. But the Drexer did not understand humans. On the burned fields of the Vayari world, the humans worked side by side with the broken survivors. They cleared rubble with their bare hands, patched wounds with what little medicine they had, and shared every last piece of food from their packs. They fought exhaustion, hunger, and despair. Yet each morning, as the sun rose behind the thick smoke, they rose with it. The Vayari watched with silent awe. They had begged for help from the great powers, but no fleets came. The humans were not a great power, yet they acted as if they carried the weight of the galaxy on their shoulders. Among them was a young human woman who had once been a farmer back on Earth. She carried no weapon sharper than a steel blade. Yet, she faced the Drexer with the same courage as any soldier. When a group of alien children cried in fear at the sound of distant engines, she sat with them, holding their hands, promising they would see the morning light. The children could not understand her words, but her calm voice made them believe. Hope, once lost, began to return. Then came the first true test. A Drexer patrol ship landed near the ruins of the Vayari capital. The warriors inside were heavily armed, their armor glinting with cruel designs. They marched with the arrogance of conquerors, expecting to find only weak aliens cowering in the shadows. Instead, they found humans standing in their way. The leader of the Drexer patrol sneered, his voice full of contempt. This world belongs to the Drexer. Leave now, or be destroyed. The human captain, his face scarred from earlier battles, stood firm. He had no grand speech, no shining armor. His reply was simple: "We're not leaving." The Drexer roared with laughter. To them, this was madness. But when they moved forward, the humans fought back with everything they had. Their weapons were crude compared to Drexer rifles, but their tactics were clever, and their will unshakable. The battle was fierce. The Drexer fired with precision, cutting through walls and trees. The humans moved quickly, using the ruins for cover, striking from places the Drexer never expected. Each time a human fell, another took their place, refusing to yield. The Vayari hid and watched, their hearts pounding. For so long, they had seen only defeat. But here, in the ashes of their home, they saw something new. They saw humans refusing to bow even when logic said they should. When the last Drexer warrior fell, silence filled the ruins. The humans stood breathing hard, battered and bloodied, but alive. The Vayari emerged from hiding, their eyes wide with disbelief. A single Drexer patrol had been defeated, not by fleets, not by armies, but by humans who should have been too weak to stand against such power. One of the elders approached the human captain. His voice shook with emotion. "Why do you fight for us? We are nothing to you. The galaxy has abandoned us. Why not you?" The captain's eyes were tired, but steady. "Because no one deserves to be alone when the darkness comes. Not you, not anyone." Those words struck deeper than any weapon. The Vayari had believed they were forgotten, that no one in the galaxy would ever risk themselves for them. Yet, here were humans, strangers from a distant world, who had chosen to fight at their side. As days passed, news spread quietly among survivors hiding across the planet. Whispers of humans who defied the Drexer reached ears that had only known despair. To some, it sounded like rumor, too good to be true. To others, it was the first sign of a miracle. But miracles come at a price. The Drexer were not blind. When reports of the human resistance reached their commanders, the laughter ended. They realized the humans were not just an annoyance, they were a spark. And sparks, left unchecked, could grow into flames that consumed even empires. The Drexer decided. The spark must be crushed quickly. Far above the Veari world, larger warships began to gather. The air would soon thunder with fire again. But the humans did not waver. They knew what was coming, yet they continued to rebuild shelters, to feed the hungry, to hold the hands of the wounded. The Veari began to follow their example. They were not warriors, but something inside them stirred. Watching the humans stand when no one else would give them strength, they thought they had lost forever. Some picked up tools as weapons. Others carried messages through dangerous zones. Little by little, the spirit of resistance grew. It was only the beginning. The galaxy still ignored their cries, and the Drexer prepared to unleash their fury. But in the ashes of a broken world, one truth had been revealed. Humanity did not turn away, and that truth would echo far beyond the Veari homeworld. The Drexer warships arrived like storm clouds over the Veari homeworld. Their engines shook the ground, and their shadows swallowed what little light still reached the surface. Every survivor knew what it meant. Destruction was coming again. Only greater this time. The Veari huddled in silence, their fear deep as ever. They had seen entire cities erased in minutes by Drexer firepower. No one believed that a few humans could stand against such terror. No one, except the humans themselves. The human captain gathered his small band. His armor was scarred, his voice hoarse, but his eyes burned with resolve. They think we'll run. They think we'll hide, but we don't hide. We make them bleed for every step they take. His words were not grand, but they carried weight. The Veari listened in the shadows, hearts trembling. Something inside them wanted to believe. The Drexer began their assault with fire from above. Explosions tore through ruins, blasting trees into splinters. The humans moved fast, pulling survivors into underground tunnels they had secretly prepared. The tunnels were narrow, damp, and dangerous, but they saved lives. For the first time, Drexer fire did not mean total slaughter. When Drexer troops landed, the real fight began. They came in black armor, carrying rifles that spat fire and plasma. Their numbers were overwhelming. Yet waiting for them in the ruins were humans who refused to surrender. The first clash was brutal. The humans fought with everything: homemade explosives, sharpened blades, and scavenged Drexer weapons. They struck from shadows, vanished into tunnels, and returned where the enemy least expected. The Drexer were used to enemies breaking at the first charge. But the humans did not break. The Veari, watching from their hiding places, saw something they had never seen before. These humans, fragile compared to the Drexer, stood like unshakable stones. They bled, they fell, but they rose again. Their courage burned so fiercely that it lit a flame in the hearts of the Veari. An elder whispered to his people, "Do you see? They fight not because they are strongest, but because they cannot bear to leave us alone. Is this not what we once dreamed our allies would be?" Slowly, the Veari began to act. A group of young Veari, inspired by human bravery, set traps along forest paths. They were clumsy at first, but when Drexer patrols fell into hidden pits, or were crushed by collapsing trees, hope spread. Others carried supplies to the humans, small offerings of food and water. Some even picked up weapons. The humans never demanded this. They never ordered the Veari to fight. But courage is a fire that spreads without words. For days the battle raged. The Drexer grew angrier. Their commanders shouted about wiping the planet clean. But the more they struck, the more resistance they faced. In one clash near the ruins of the Crystal Towers, a Drexer commander confronted the human captain directly. The alien towered over him, his armor glowing with power. "You are nothing," the Drexer growled. "No one comes to help you. You will die here, alone." The captain stood tall despite the blood on his face. "Then we die together." "But not alone, never alone." His words carried beyond the battlefield. The Vayari hiding nearby repeated them in their own language. Never alone. It became a chant whispered in the tunnels, then shouted in the streets. A people once broken now found their voice again. The Drexer could not understand this change. They saw only weakness where humans saw strength. They thought compassion made species soft. They did not realize compassion could make them unbreakable. By the end of the week, the Drexer controlled the skies but not the ground. Every street became a trap, every ruin a battlefield. The humans and Vayari together turned survival into resistance. The Drexer won battles, but they could not win peace. In the ashes of war, a strange bond grew. The Vayari children clung too. Human soldiers as if they were older siblings. Elders blessed them in ceremonies, marking their faces with the colors of hope. The humans accepted this quietly, never asking for thanks. Yet they knew the truth. They were few. Supplies were low. Reinforcements would not come. Against the might of the Drexer Empire, they could not hold forever. But humans had never fought for forever. They fought for today, for the wounded who needed saving, for the children who deserved one more sunrise, for the strangers who should not face darkness alone. And that was enough. The Drexer believed they were crushing resistance. Instead, they were planting something far more dangerous. They were showing the galaxy that even when the great powers turned away, humanity did not. Whispers spread beyond the Vayari homeworld. Smugglers, traders, and wanderers carried stories across the stars. Tales of humans standing against the Drexer spread like sparks on dry grass. Some laughed, calling it impossible. Others listened in silence, wondering if perhaps humanity was not as weak as the galaxy believed. The war was far from over. In truth, it was only beginning. But already, one thing had changed forever. The Vayari were no longer alone. The Drexer commanders were furious. Their empire had crushed countless worlds. Yet here, on a single backwater planet, resistance refused to die. A few humans and a scattered people of builders had turned what should have been a swift conquest into a bleeding wound. It was not acceptable. The Drexer demanded order, and order meant fear. They doubled their forces. More soldiers poured from the skies. More fire rained on the forests. More villages burned. Yet for every strike, resistance grew. The humans moved through the tunnels and ruins like shadows, striking quickly, then vanishing. The Vayari followed. Their lead, setting traps, smuggling supplies, passing messages. What was once a broken people became something stronger, because they had seen the humans stand. The galaxy still watched in silence. The great powers saw the reports, but chose to turn away. Some whispered that humanity was reckless, interfering in a war that was not theirs. Others muttered that humans were fools, destined to die for strangers who could never repay them. But the stories spread faster than the silence could contain. In distant marketplaces, smugglers told tales of humans shielding alien children. In council chambers, envoys repeated rumors of Drexer patrols defeated by ragged soldiers from Earth. Many scoffed, but a few listened with unease. If the stories were true, then something dangerous had begun. On the ground, the humans knew none of this. They had no time for stories or politics. They fought day by day, hour by hour. Their weapons were crude, their armor dented, their bodies tired. Yet their spirit never bent. One night, deep in the ruins, the human captain gathered both his people and the Vayari leaders. The room was lit only by the glow of a small fire. Dust and smoke clung to their clothes. The captain's voice was quiet, but steady. The Drexer believe we are weak. They believe we are alone. Let them keep believing. We will make this world a place they cannot hold. A young Vayari stood, his hands trembling but his eyes bright. We are not warriors. But if you fight for us, then we will fight for you. The words brought silence, then nods. The humans exchanged glances, tired, proud, and determined. This was no longer just a human effort. It was something greater that the days that followed turned the Vayari world into a maze of resistance. Drexer supply convoys vanished in ambushes. Patrols disappeared into forests. Weapons stolen from fallen soldiers were turned against their former masters. Every time the Drexer thought they had crushed the fire, it spread wider among the Vayari. A song began. It was an old tune of their people, once sung at harvests and gatherings. Now they sang it quietly in the tunnels, in the ruins, in the dark nights when fear pressed too heavily. The humans did not understand the words, but they understood the sound. It was the sound of a people finding their spirit again. The Drexer commanders raged. They ordered harsher punishments, greater destruction. Whole forests were burned. Cities, already in ruins, were blasted into craters. Thousands suffered. Yet the Drexer could not erase the new truth. Resistance lived, and the galaxy continued to listen. Refugees fleeing the war carried stories to other worlds. They spoke of humans who stayed when no one else would. They told of soldiers who stood against hopeless odds, not for glory, not for power, but because they refused to abandon the weak in the Council of Worlds. Some began to whisper that perhaps the humans were dangerous not because of their weapons, but because of their hearts. Empires ruled by fear could not understand such a thing, but they feared what it might inspire. Back on the battlefield, the humans saw only the struggle of the next day. They bled, they lost friends, they buried their dead quietly in shallow graves. Yet for every loss, they fought harder. The Vayari stood beside them now, no longer broken, but burning with defiance. One evening, as the sun set over the charred horizon, a group of Vayari elders approached the human captain. Their robes were torn, their faces lined with grief and hope. One spoke softly. "You came when no one else did. You bled for us when all others turned away. Whatever happens, know this, you are part of us now." The captain said nothing at first. He simply looked at the sky where Drexer warships circled like vultures. Then he nodded once. "Then we stand together." It was a simple promise, but it meant more than any treaty ever signed. The Drexer believed they could crush resistance with fire and fear. They did not see that something far greater was rising in the ashes. A bond between species, born not of power, but of sacrifice. And though the humans did not yet know it, the galaxy was beginning to change. The Drexer Empire had expected a quick victory. Instead, weeks had passed and their forces were locked in a war of attrition against a handful of humans and a people they had once dismissed as weak. Every day they delayed was an insult to their power, and every loss a wound to their pride. Reports spread across the galaxy faster than the Drexer could silence them. Traitors whispered of humans who fought with nothing but scraps and still made Drexer soldiers bleed. Refugees told stories of fragile Vayari standing tall again because humanity refused to let them fall. At first, many scoffed. But as more and more reports arrived, the laughter began to fade. The galaxy's rulers were forced to ask themselves, what kind of species defied the Drexer for no reward? In the Council of Worlds, silence filled the Grand Chamber as the question was raised. No one had an answer. For ages, the galaxy had been built on fear, treaties, and careful survival. Empires calculated every move. No one risked themselves for strangers. It was not logical. It was not profitable. Yet humanity had done exactly that. "They are reckless," one ambassador sneered. "They will destroy themselves." "Perhaps," another replied, his voice quieter. "But tell me, if they survive, what will they become?" The question lingered like a shadow none could ignore. Meanwhile, on the Vayari homeworld, the humans fought on. Their numbers were small, their supplies nearly gone, but their spirit never broke. They trained the Vayari to fight, not as soldiers, but as defenders of their homes. Farmers learned to set ambushes. Builders shaped weapons from the ruins. Children carried messages through secret tunnels. A people once helpless now became a thorn in the Empire's side. The Drexer answered with fury. They unleashed firestorms across the forests, destroying entire regions. Whole villages were wiped out. The cost was heavy. Many Vayari fell. Some humans, too, never rose again. Their graves were marked only with stones and whispered promises. Yet for every death, resistance grew stronger. The Drexer could kill bodies, but not the fire that had been lit. One night, as the humans and Vayari huddled together in the ruins of an old temple, the human captain spoke to the survivors. His face was pale with exhaustion, but his voice was steady. We cannot match their numbers. We cannot match their ships, but we can match their will. If they want this world, they will pay for every step they take. The Vayari listened, their eyes burning with determination. They had once believed themselves forgotten. Now they believed in something new, not only in humanity, but in themselves. Among the children, a new game began. They pretended to be humans, standing tall against invisible enemies. They shouted the words they had heard again and again. Never alone. The laughter of children, once silenced by fear, returned to the tunnels. But the Drexer were not blind. They saw the change, and it terrified them more than any weapon. Resistance was spreading, not just on the battlefield, but in the hearts of a people they thought broken. Their commanders decided it had to end. They prepared to send a fleet large enough to crush the planet completely. It was not strategy anymore, it was vengeance. Yet vengeance came too late. The galaxy had been watching, and finally, whispers turned into voices. A few small species, long bullied by the Drexer, began to speak in favor of the humans. If they stand, why not us? They asked. Smugglers smuggled not just goods, but weapons, slipping crates into Vayari hands. Old mercenaries, tired of serving empires, offered their blades for nothing more than food and shelter. A rebellion was no longer only a dream, it was beginning to take shape. And all of it had started with a single human ship that refused to turn away. The Vayari elders met with the human captain one evening, beneath the burned sky. They spoke, words heavy with gratitude. You came when all others abandoned us. You gave us more than weapons. You gave us back our spirit. Whatever happens now, humanity has changed us forever. The captain shook his head. His eyes were tired, but his voice was firm. We didn't come to change you. We came because it was right. The words seemed simple, but they carried a power the galaxy could not understand and could not stop. Above the world, Drexer fleets prepared to descend with overwhelming force. On the ground, humans and Vayari prepared not for victory, but for defiance. They knew they could not win by strength. But strength was never what defined humanity, and as the stars filled with the shadows of warships, one truth burned brighter than all the rest. Humanity had done what no other species dared. They had stood when all others turned away. The galaxy would never be the same. The sky above the Vayari world turned black with Drexer warships. Their fleet blotted out the stars, a wall of steel and fire meant to erase all hope. To the Drexer, this was not just conquest anymore, it was punishment. Humanity's defiance had humiliated them. The Vayari's survival was an insult. Now they would burn both from existence. On the ground, the humans and Vayari stood ready. Their weapons were crude, their numbers small. They had no illusions. They knew they could not defeat the fleet above. But they also knew something the Drexer could not comprehend. Sometimes standing was more powerful than winning. The human captain gathered his people and the Vayari elders. The air trembled with the thunder of approaching doom, but his voice was calm. They think fear will break us. They think fire will silence us. Let them come. We will show them that even if we fall together. The Vayari, once a people of peace who had cowered in silence, lifted their weapons. Their hands shook, but their eyes no longer held only fear. They had learned from the humans that courage was not the absence of fear, it was standing anyway. The Drexer descended. The battle was unlike any before. Firestorms ripped across forests, and cities were blasted into rubble. But every street, every ruin, every tunnel fought back. Humans and Vayari struck together, side by side, vanishing into shadows, reappearing where least expected. For every Drexer soldier who advanced, one fell to traps, blades, or sheer stubborn defiance. The losses were heavy. Humans bled. Vayari fell, yet the fire in their spirit did not die. And that fire did something no weapon could. It spread beyond the battlefield. Hidden broadcasts, sent by smugglers and scattered allies, carried the images of resistance across the galaxy. Whole worlds watched in stunned silence as humans stood where no one else had dared. They saw fragile Vayari shouting the words, "Never alone," as they charged into battle with humans at their side. They saw the Drexeran Empire feared by all beings slowed, wounded, resisted. For the first time in living memory, the galaxy felt something stronger than fear. It felt shame. One by one, voices rose. Small civilizations that had always stayed silent began to speak. If humans can stand, why not us? They asked. Minor fleets, long hidden in fear, moved cautiously toward the Vayari system. At first only a few, then more. The galaxy's silence cracked. The Drexer did not understand. They had brought overwhelming force. They had firepower enough to shatter worlds. Yet the harder they struck, the louder the resistance grew. Humanity's defiance had become a signal that no empire could smother. On the ground, the final clash came at the ruins of the Vayari capital. Drexer troops surged forward, armored and merciless. The humans fought until their ammunition ran dry, then with blades, then with bare hands. The Vayari, once a people who had never known war, stood shoulder to shoulder with them. Together, they fought not for victory, but for dignity. The human captain was struck down in the chaos, wounded badly. Yet when the Drexer commander advanced, towering above him, the captain dragged himself upright. His voice was hoarse, his body broken, but his words carried across the battlefield. "You will not break us. Not today. Not ever." The Vayari roared those words back in their own language. The sound echoed through the ruins, carried on hidden broadcasts across the stars. And in that moment, something in the Drexer faltered. They had built their empire on fear. But here was a world where fear no longer ruled. Then, like thunder rolling across the void, the first allied ships appeared. Small fleets from minor civilizations. Smugglers turned fighters, mercenaries who had grown tired of serving tyrants. Alone, they would have been nothing. Together, they were enough. They swarmed the edges of the Drexer fleet, cutting supply lines, striking at weak points. The Drexer, proud and unbending, suddenly faced a truth they had never considered. Their empire was not invincible. The battle dragged on, fierce and merciless. But little by little, the Drexer line broke. Their commanders, unwilling to waste more ships on what should have been a simple conquest, finally gave the order to withdraw. The great fleet that had come to erase the Vayari turned and left the skies burning but not conquered. When the last ship vanished into the void, silence fell. The humans stood among the ruins, bloodied, broken, but alive. The Vayari wept, not in despair, but in gratitude. For the first time, their world was free, not because of fleets, not because of councils, but because humanity had refused to look away. The galaxy watched in stunned silence. What had begun as a hopeless act of defiance had become a spark that spread across the stars. No species dared to help before. But because humanity had stood, others had found their courage. In the council of worlds, whispers became a single truth spoken aloud. Humanity has changed everything. On the burned soil of the Vayari homeworld, children gathered around the humans who remained. They carried no medals, no banners, no riches, yet to the Vayari they were heroes. Not because they had saved everyone, but because they had been there. When no one else was, the galaxy would never forget the day humans taught them that compassion could be stronger than fear. And from that day forward, the words spread like a promise across the stars, never alone.